It is my honor to welcome Dr. John Ryan to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure, Emily, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, we had a opportunity to connect and so much unfolded in that conversation. And I'm just really excited to dive in and to explore. There's so many things that I would love to talk to you about. And before we do, I would like to just share with our listeners a little bit about you. You're um, quite an interesting, remarkable person. You are a board certified specialist physician with a long interest in spirituality, consciousness, and energy based healing. And Dr. John's life was transformed by a mystical Kundalini awakening in the late 1980s that led him to explore the reality of energy based healing and spiritual transformation. For over 20 years, he has participated in emerging energy healing paradigm as an energy healing practitioner and counselor in support of personal transformation. Dr. John is an author, speaker, teacher, healer, and visionary, and the author of Unity Field Healing and the founder of Unity Field Healing, a quantum based meditative tool for well-being and bio-spiritual integration. And you can learn more by visiting Dr. John's website at drjohnryan.org. Welcome again. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, it's really my pleasure. I'm looking forward to our conversation and for sharing with everybody who's listening.
Yes. Yeah, I'd love if you could share with listeners a little bit about your journey and how you came to be doing the work that you're doing in the world.
Sure. Yeah. So, as you mentioned, sort of in the intro, my story goes back to the late 1980s, I guess, when I was just finishing medical school at the time. I'd kind of gone through my formal education, and I was ready to start my life, begin my career. And Spirit had another plan in store, I think. But I started to experience these energy processes that kind of began to live them because I didn't know what they were. I was not really a spiritual seeker. I didn't meditate or do yoga or anything like that. I was just minding my own business. And all of a sudden I began to have these energy things where I would like pop out of my body as I was going to sleep, or I would start to see energy fields around people as we were having conversations and things like that. And so I started to try to learn, gain any kind of insight, into what was happening to me. And I was starting to ask questions and explore, but I really couldn't find anybody who could help me understand what I was living. Times were a little different than today. There's so much information available, to people undergoing spiritual awakenings and Kundalini awakenings and these things. But at the time, it was pretty scarce to find sources. But I woke up one day with this really powerful intuition to go to a bookstore, and I followed through on the intuition. And when I went into the bookstore, I was kind of overwhelmed as I looked around. I kind of thought, how am I ever going to find what I'm looking for in a place as big as this? It was like an old mansion of a house with rooms, and there were different sections of spirituality, like Eastern spirituality, crystal healing, these kinds of things in different rooms in this house. And all of a sudden, as my eyes panned the bookstore, there was a book on the bookshelf that started to glow as if it had light in it. And I walked over and took the book off the shelf. And the name of the book was The Spontaneous Awakening of Kundalini by Gopi Krishna. And so I started to read the information on the back of the book, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is explaining some of the things that I'm living. It was kind of a doorway that brought me into an understanding of something I had no idea about at all. Like I had no training in Eastern spirituality or esoteric healing or anything like that. And it began to teach me about a whole other world or a whole other reality, an energy reality and a consciousness reality that's part of our human design. And so you can imagine this kind of triggered a lot of questions, a lot of curiosity, a lot of experiences that I kind of opened myself up to because of what I was learning and discovering through this access. And it drew me towards energy-based healing. So I began to, study the Eastern systems of healing like Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine, and look at some of the philosophies and the deeper understanding behind those things. And it opened my mind, my consciousness, if you will, to a profound understanding of the energetic nature of reality and how consciousness molds reality, how the consciousness that's held in on energy forms actually imposes certain creations or certain experiences within the fields of energy. Immediately how this applied to healing and applied to all kinds of things. It didn't explain everything about the human, the human story, but it began to reveal to me, I guess, how the way we think, the way we feel, the habitual patterns of belief, the emotions we hold, the emotions we don't express, all the things that we live as human beings can have a huge impact on our life and on our reality. And how healing is often a release of these energies, like opening ourselves up to encounter emotions or discover belief systems that are limiting or self-destructive or narrow in all kinds of different ways. So of course none of this happens without you going through your own journey. So I was encountering my own life and my own world at the same time as I was learning these things. And then the experiences began to deepen. And over a period of time, I had started to do healing work with people, doing energy work with people, and having some really profound and interesting experiences. But I started to receive visions. And in the visions, I was being shown things or taught things. And so every time I would get comfortable with another level of understanding, something else would happen to kind of catapult me into another experience that you have to integrate and process, I guess. So the visions, as I began experiencing them, they were teaching me things. They were kind of downloading as packets of information or visual stories of information it was like it was coded with information that contained teaching that would help me understand things in a deeper way. And so it led to a series of visions about DNA and how our DNA is part of a spiritual system and how there's a whole quantum level of reality to our human DNA. And within our DNA is an energetic connection to our soul, to our spirit, to our higher self. And so the field between this higher self level of consciousness and the physical body is templated, if you will, by a field of energy that overlays our DNA when we're developing as a human being. And so in these visions, I was kind of shown the process of what happens when a soul is incarnating. So, what we do, where we go in consciousness, how we bring together the energies and the composition of things that will form part of a lifetime. And we bring them forth with us while we incarnate. And we have this information available to us while we're in that lifetime. But then, as all of this was happening, I also began to understand something monumental was happening on the planet. And I knew this, I think I've always known it. I think we've all always known it, that there's something mysterious happening right now on the earth. And it has a really deep and spiritual aspect to it. And it's by design. And people refer to it often as the ascension or the massive shift in energy and consciousness that's part of the earth and part of humanity. And it's moving forward in a way that's taking like humanity as a civilization into a brand new way of being, a brand new way of living. And so it's more than just a paradigm shift. It's kind of a galactic event. And it has, a relationship with energy and healing and personal transformation. And it's kind of the underlying reason why so many people are drawn to this discovery and to this understanding at this point in time. And so I began to learn more things about the ascension and have inner teachings about the ascension. I began to understand it in a more integrated way. I began to see how healing, the ascension, quantum DNA, how it all kind of fits together into a package that basically explains what's happening to humanity, to an individual human being as they go through the ascension process. And so that led eventually to the work, the unity field healing work that you mentioned, but I'll just park that aside for a minute because I don't want to take too long in my answer.
Oh, wow. So much there. Like I'm just following your journey and it's rich and it just I love how you really embraced, I just imagine you as a board certified physician, kind of maybe in the Western medicine world at that time when you had a spontaneous Kundalini awakening and really opening up to this expanded knowledge and integrating it into the work that you're doing in such a beautiful way. And I'd love to hear more about the ascension from your perspective and how that's really impacting humanity at this time.
Sure. So the way I understand ascension is to truly understand the ascension, we have to think in really big terms. It's not just an event happening on the earth. It has more of a galactic or universal kind of a essence behind it. And the best way to understand it is that humanity and the earth they live in a energy system that we can think of in terms of the galaxy. And there are things that happen in the galaxy that are timed on patterns of energy. So just like everything in life is founded on cycles. So we get up in the morning, the sun rises, we have a day, the sun sets. During that day, there's about 12 hours that come and go. There's 60 minutes. So everything is cycling all the time. And the Earth is part of a much bigger system of energy. And it fits into a paradigm where we go through a rotation in the galaxy where the axis of Earth and its relationship to the center of the galaxy comes and goes in cycles. And every 26,000 years, we come to a point where there's like a reset of energy. And so when we look at these kinds of energy cycles, we understand that the Earth is really poised to undergo one of these resets at this point in time. And so the Mayans, who had a profound understanding of knowledge and the time calendars, revealed this information to humanity. And they talked about this being the end times. They used the specific date, December 12th, 2022. And so in that, did you want to pause?
Yes, hold on one second. I'm sorry. So I'd love to hear from you, your perspective about the ascension and how it's impacting humanity at this time.
Sure. So that's a big question. But to really understand the ascension, we have to think in really expanded terms, because the ascension is not simply an event. It's something that fits into a very large time cycle that's galactic in scope. And so to understand the ascension, we have to kind of visit the concept of cycles and understand how everything in creation is founded on cycles that happen. So the easiest way to relate to that is in terms of, our own daily calendar, or the hours in a day, or the sun rises, the sun sets, the sun rises, the sun sets, an hour begins, it ends, another hour begins, it ends. There are all these superimposed time cycles that are happening all at the same time. And so years, we have decades, we have centuries, we keep expanding the time frame. But we can move into even huge cycles of time that are really only understood when we approach the cycle of the whole solar system and how it fits into the galaxy. And so there's something called the Procession of the Equinoxes that basically talks about how the Earth is aligned to the center of our galactic system. And now we go through these periods of 26,000 years where the spin of the axis of the Earth moves through a full cycle, and we come back to being aligned with the center of the galaxy. And the Mayans, who were probably the most famous timekeepers, in our history, in ancient history, had calendars that kind of talked about these big concepts and how the Earth fits into a galactic calendar or galactic time frame. And they explained that in December of 2012, we would reach a point where it was the end of time. But the concept was misunderstood, in popular language and movies of the Armageddon and all this kind of stuff. It was kind of hijacked, I guess, for dramatic effect. But really what they were saying is it represents the end of a cycle. And like we understand, just as a year ends and a new one begins at the same moment, the end of the cycle of December 2012 is also the beginning of a new cycle. And so when we understand that simple structure, we realize the earth was poised to go through a cycle of transformation in the year 2012. And so understanding that kind of simplifies the process because you realize we were earmarked, if you will, to undergo this process at this point in time. Now, the challenge, of course, is understanding what happens to humanity when this occurs. And so the outcome or the what was happening at that point in time had two possible futures. And so when we were born, particularly people born before 1980, you were born into a time frame where you realized that the future of the earth was not 100% decided. It was still possible for it to go through this rapid acceleration in energy and consciousness, or to go through a reset, like has happened so many times in the past. People are familiar with the Atlantean civilizations and Lemurian civilizations, and ancient history that talks about civilizations that rose and fell. And in the falling, there was a reset that took place and a new cycle began. But as we go forward, there was the potential for humanity to go through a rapid change in energy and consciousness and begin the seeding of what we would call an ascended civilization on the planet. And the harmonic convergence in 19, you can think of it as measuring the spiritual maturity of humanity. And so that was when we decided what the future would be. And so when the measurement was done back in that time frame, it was understood that humanity, despite all our foibles and all the crazy things that we create on the earth and all the ways we are dishonoring of the earth and consciousness and each other and you name it, there's enough love, there's enough of quotient of love and mercy and compassion and understanding of our civilization to go through this rapid shift, this rapid change. And so, because the outcome was that we succeeded, so to speak, the earth was poised to be restructured in energy. And so, there were energetic changes that began on the planet. And the first thing was a restructuring of the electromagnetic grid, which took place between that time and about 2012. And then the activation of other grid structures or energy structures that we can refer to as the crystalline grids on the planet began to wake up or be activated, if you will. And all of this is an energetic foundation to support humanity in moving forward into a new time, a new energy, a new consciousness, and a new humanity. And this is the beginning. So we're really at the threshold, if you will, of an ascended civilization. Now, it's pretty messy because as we live through this transformation, what's happening is it's a process of kind of leaving one way of being and learning how to live in a brand new way of being. And that's simple as a statement or as a concept, but when you live that on a global scale with all the humans on the planet involved in it, it can get pretty messy pretty quick. And the energy on the planet is also a little resistant to change. So we can think of it as an enlightenment, the integration of new energy, new light, new information, new consciousness, but all the patterns in the old paradigm that are based on control and fear and restriction and all the things that we recognize as duality concepts where there's a fear and that can control the way people live and do things, have to be dismantled. And so everything that was part of that world that doesn't fit in the paradigm of the new world has to be transformed. And so when we take that on a global scale in a civilization that had lots of fears and lots of levels of control and misinformation, starts to go through this process of acceleration and awakening and revelation, there's a resistance to it. And so people have to go through the process of clearing that energy and allowing the new energy to settle in and begin. And we're kind of really in the throes of that right now, which is why there's so much turmoil and chaos. as we
They
speak.
truly are, and I feel like listeners can definitely relate to so much of what you're describing, and especially with the transformational change that's taking place. I mean, certainly from an external perspective, we can see the shifts that our planet is undergoing. And I'd love for you to share your perspective on what's happening from an energetic perspective, maybe some of the things that we're not fully, some of us maybe, but on an energetic level, what's happening internally during this shift.
There's two levels of sh- sure, yeah. So there's a couple of levels on which it's happening. So the first is there are energetic changes that are happening on the planet. The foundational energetic nature of the planet is changing. So the pole energy was restructured, this electromagnetic grid. And you can kind of think that as the anchor. It's the template on which everything is built and sits on the physical world, kind of like a magnetic force of energy. And on that, there are other structures or grids of energy that awaken, like the crystalline grids and all the elements of energy and consciousness that are part of that expansion, which is it's a whole topic unto itself. So I'll just say that for now. But while that's happening, it's triggering changes in human beings as well, because we live as resonant beings on the planet. If the energy of the earth changes, it's like vibrating and singing, and it sings into our energy system, and we're responding in resonance to the changes. So we feel a stimulus to change within us as well. And as we change and expand in consciousness and energy, it's supporting the shift in the energy that's changing on the planet. So it becomes kind of a mutual relationship that we're living. And the way that shows up in us as human beings is in subtle and very everyday ways. We start having inspirations of new consciousness. We become aware, for example, of something in our life that's not working well, or we learn to take responsibility for a situation and we want to figure out a personal way to transform it and turn it into something more magical, or that has a value. We become inspired to learn new things that were foreign or not in our thought processes up to a certain point in time. We begin to transform relationships. We let go of more toxic relationships. We want to develop more loving and nurturing relationships, for example. So there's very everyday kind of things that begin to happen. But energetically, there's also a lot of changes that happen in the human body. So the human body is structured on a template of energy that we would call the etheric body. And then there are many, many other layers of energy that are part of our human makeup as well. So the emotional body, higher spiritual bodies, the mental body, and they all communicate through a chakra system and a system of meridians within the body. So as our process is happening and energetic changes are happening, they're affecting the energy field of our body. So people began to have strange experiences. They start to feel vibrations. They start to become aware of their connection to an energy field that's bigger than who they are as an individual person. They start to awaken to things that come in that field, like intuition or being able to feel the experience person and relate to them with deep compassion and deep understanding and mercy. And you start to feel this aspect of yourself that's part of something bigger than you. And within that space, you begin to develop the tools of spirit, if you will, that work in that quantum space. Things like your intuition becomes really enhanced and profound. And you realize that as a human being, you have access to knowledge and information that's outside the scope of your memory and logic or rational processes. So, for example, all of a sudden you know something, you have an insight where you understand something that you didn't before, or you have an inspiration to do something that brings you to a source of information or a book or a workshop or something like that, that exposes you to new concepts and new information that your soul is seeking for you to know. And you begin to understand that all of us are first spiritual beings. We're not just human beings, we're souls. So, what's driving this whole process is our soul's desire to evolve and to grow. And you become more identified with that spiritual aspect of yourself. So, you lose this idea of being just a physical 3D structured human being, who's born and has a life that's kind of defined. You become aware that there's a soul in you, and it drives you to transform and to use your experience as a human being to grow and learn and achieve certain things that are all kind of founded on expansion and love and higher knowledge. And so that's kind of what begins to happen, and as a concept, and you can imagine all the ways that that would manifest as experiences for each one of us as individual beings.
Absolutely. And you described that so beautifully. And I feel like for me, this process connects us with our multidimensional nature. It really allows us to expand and tap into gifts and memories and intuitive abilities that perhaps previously were dormant. And so, I'd love to kind of explore this idea of quantum DNA because as you have described, it is that ability to really tap in and connect more deeply with our soul or oversoul, and perhaps how you see that from a energetic perspective.
Sure. So the way that I was introduced to the quantum DNA understanding was I was given a vision. And in the vision, what was happening is I was shown what happens when we are incarnating. And so the way this unfolded for me was I was brought to this place where I could see this luminous body. It looked like an energy body that had, like, it was bedazzled with jewels, like rubies, all kinds of stones and diamonds and different things. And this body kind of contracted a little bit, and like the little Russian stacking dolls, it was like another aspect of energy kind of came out of that more luminous being and looked more like a human being and came down to this place where I was looking over a bridge at the earth. And what I was doing in this vision was trying to figure out energetically where I would go in that incarnation according to the directive of what my soul wanted me to experience or achieve in that lifetime. So you can kind of think of it as a planning process. It was, what country would I be born in? What family would I be born into? What energy, what challenges would I want to take on? This kind of stuff. And then from that space, it was like I went back in energy to a higher level of reality or experience or energy, however we want to conceptualize that. And I was standing in what seemed like a courtyard. And as I looked around the courtyard, I could see doors at the periphery, kind of like a European hotel or a monastery, where there's a courtyard in the middle and doors open into the courtyard with many, many rooms. And I knew intuitively if I went into a doorway, it would be like walking into a lifetime. So if I opened any door, it would be like going on a journey into a very specific lifetime or an incarnation. But what happened instead was I was told to kind of observe. And this beautiful crystalline structure began to develop in the middle of the courtyard. And it was shaped like a double-sided octahedron or a double pyramid. And it was connected to a strand of energy that looked like a golden chain or a helix. And from the doorways, all kinds of energy began to flow. And so it was moving from different places and filling up this structure. And so the little octahedron became full of light and vibration until it was like scintillating. It was so luminous. And then suddenly at one point in time, it stopped. And I knew that like the process had completed. And it was like it shot through hyperspace, like on Star Trek. It's like flying through the stars. And it merged with a crystal that was at the top of a mountain or the peak of a mountain, and at the same time engulfed in energy around a developing fetus. And so it was like showing me the way energy transfers from the spiritual level of consciousness through this crystalline structure of the earth and merges with a baby that's developing that was kind of planned. And this connection of energy is never lost. So as you're living the lifetime, you always have energy or this braid of energy. But then I was shown what happens now because of the ascension. And what was happening was when we were born historically, it's like we would be born with a certain purpose. We'd have a plan for a lifetime. We'd have We would have come, you know, we may have planned to be a mother or a father, to have children, to be a writer or a teacher or a physician or a nurse or something. There would be many things that you would have planned to do while you were there in human form. And you might have taken on attributes of karma to heal, like if you wanted to learn to forgive, or you wanted to learn to, you know, be more empowered around your self-worth. You'd take on experiences that would help you achieve that in your lifetime. And the ascension kind of throws all that into a new process. And what begins to happen in the ascension is this connection that we have to the soul through this braid or this strand of DNA begins to be catalyzed to expand. And so what it's doing to us is, while we're in the body, it's opening our awareness of things that exist outside the frame of this lifetime. So we become aware first of a spiritual reality. We become aware of ourselves as spiritual beings. And we start saying things like that. You know, I'm a soul in a body. I'm not just a body looking for spiritual things. I am actually a spiritual being living inside the human form. And I have other lifetimes. I have memories. I'm part of a more expanded consciousness. I can think of it as galactic or interstellar, or, you know, there's all kinds of conceptual ways we can approach that. But we're part of something much bigger than simply just being a single human being in form. And with that comes all kinds of awarenesses, like people start remembering past lifetimes, or they recognize their affinity to certain activities or cultures or things they love to do, creatively speaking, or, you know, in terms of social engagement and all this kind of stuff. And so, or drawn to languages, so they feel really, you know, strong affinity with a certain kind of culture, or, you know, this kind of stuff. And all of these things are draws that exist within our quantum memory. At the same time as we do that, we also sometimes trip across the energies of those lifetimes that were really powerful.
Mhm.
So if we lived a lifetime, for example, where you were doing healing work and you were appreciated for the work you were doing, but then people became afraid because of what you were doing, and they started to ostracize you like a witch or something like that, and they would kill you, or, you know, throw you in a well or burn you at a stake. That would create a profound emotional memory. So you can see how that kind of a memory might impact you at this point in your life. These memories bubble up, and we have to kind of encounter them and go through them, because the memories we held that way historically were there to help teach us and keep us safe. For example, if you were in a world where it wasn't safe to do that, the memory of what happened, you'd say, oh, it's not safe. You know, I don't want to show people that I can do healing work and these kinds of things, because I know what happens. It doesn't end well. It's a bad experience. So you don't do it. You stay closed. But now, as the energy is kind of pushing us all to open, we have to go through those fears that were once protective, but now useless. Because at this point in time, it's safe to go through this awakening. It's safe to go through this opening. And we need a little bit of time to get used to that kind of acceptance, or the concept of as we each live our own experience. And you see that a lot in people, although they don't understand what they're living. That's the kind of essence or the energy of what they're living.
I
Yeah,
love how you're describing this. I feel like so many listeners can relate. I know that I can personally to this journey of like having stuff bubble up, and it's like, okay, you know, this is here for me because I'm ready to expand and experience in a new way.
exactly. And it's almost like a balloon, you know, you get to it's stretched to the point where you're really aware of it, because it's stretched so tight and you have to pop through it in order to move to the next level or the next phase. And as we go through it, then new things open up, new potentials open up, new understanding opens up. And you realize it's a journey of many of those little moments, you know, that happen along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to go forward a little bit because, you know, time is so interesting, right? And I would love to hear, you know, I know that you've shared some predictions for this year, and just in future, I feel like aging is something that we're going to look at in a whole different way. I mean, I think first of all, we're going to live much longer, but there's You know, we have various different programs that we're removing. And one of them, I think, is around aging and just this lie that, you know, it goes downhill when you reach a certain age. And so I'd love to hear, I mean, that's just one example, but I feel like with this quantum activation of our DNA and all that's taking place is just really being able to experience our current reality in a new way. What are some of the things that you're seeing? And
So I love the question because we always talk about healing and we're looking in backwards time when we're dealing with that. But to think towards the future is an understanding of what's, and that's such a magical and beautiful thing to realize. As we go forward in this energy, the connection we hold to the spiritual aspect of ourself is expanded. And a lot of healing is really the process of that expansion. Healing is a natural state. We're always doing things on the earth to heal, but healing is the way you are when you're fully in communion with the higher energy and the balance that it brings into your reality. So healing is often a process of correcting restrictions or correcting imbalances or distortions that get created for one reason or another in the energy system. But as we open up energetically, a lot of that happens spontaneously. And so healing becomes a very natural, kind of a mystical, magical thing. But at the same time, it can be understood if we open our minds to the process of what's happening. So things that we would have been restricted by or held on to by belief systems, beliefs about healing, beliefs about ourselves, can be dismantled. And as we do that, then healing can happen in a really profound and magical way. So a lot of healing falls into that category when we start talking about energy healing and ascension-based transformation. But as we go forward, when we look historically at humanity, there was a reason why lifetimes would be short. And the real reason was we would be born, we would have experiences, we would integrate information and knowledge from those experiences. We would grow in certain ways, we might make certain mistakes, and we would gain a wisdom that comes from experience by living those things. And then the point would be, once you've done it, you would pass over, go back into spirit, and you would plan another incarnation to continue your evolution as a soul. That works really well in a paradigm where someone is born in a world where you don't understand your spiritual connection. And we were veiled from it purposely by design to have that experience. As we go through the ascension and these energy systems begin to open in the way that they're opening, the need for rapid returning like that starts to fade away. There's actually more value in staying longer and taking experiences to a fuller maturity, because it's not just all about karma and overcoming the more minor aspects of spiritual development. So for example, if you talk to someone who's a seasoned soul or an old soul, they'll tell you immediately to lie is not good, to steal from your neighbor is not a good thing. Like, you don't need incarnations to learn these things. You've already mastered the basics, so to speak. But you're learning now to bring new energy, new information, and new power into your best things in service of the world from that place of being. And so there's a value in staying longer. So you can kind of see how, as we go into this energy, an energy that's primed to make us stay for a longer period of time. And so we'll begin to witness that. We'll start to see humans live more than 60, 70, 80 years. They begin to live 80, 90, 100. We'll see 110, 120, and a longer lifespan like that will become more normal. And we'll also become more aware and conscious about the population on the earth, and we'll have things in place so that we control the population, not in a control way, but we make conscious decisions around things so that the planet's not like just super overpopulated with 35 billion people or trillion people. We'll use contraception and different things to kind of make sure that the earth is sustainable in that way. And all of that will become really natural in our way of thinking as we move forward. But you can kind of see how that's already begun, like how as humanity evolves and humans are going through their own experiences, these are the things we're coming to in terms of our own decisions and our own realizations. It's kind of happening in a very natural way. And so on one level, it's this big mystical process, but on another level, you can see how it's happening to us in transformations in thinking and transformations in culture, encountering the challenges that that brings to us as humanity and creating solutions that nurture higher level thinking in the way we do things. And so you can kind of see how we're introduced to it through the level of our human experiences. And so, so that's kind of how I see that all unfolding. And life healing in the future will be more based on expanded understandings that include energy, that include quantum energy, or what we would call interdimensional energy, working with templates and patterns of energy that exist invisible to us as human beings, but are part of the design of the energy system of the body, and can bring healing, restoration, rebalancing into the energy field. And it'll become more of a process of caretaking, as we'll learn to take care of our energy. And in doing that, healing will stay with us. We won't develop the same kinds of illnesses and diseases that we tend to do at this point in time.
What are some ways that people can take care of their energy?
So great question, because we have to look, really have to start learning how to do this. Like that's where we are in the process. And so the most important thing to realize is, number one, we're all spiritual beings. Each one of us is a soul, and your soul will direct you how to find that center in yourself. And so what we need to do as human beings is to make time and a space for that consciousness and that. If we do, we'll see the things that really work for us. For a lot of people, it's meditation. They'll learn to meditate, they'll learn to still their mental aspect, they'll learn to still their emotional aspect, become a witness with inside your own energy of thoughts and feelings that are surfacing, and learn to find that center place within yourself. And if you give yourself the time each day to do that, you'll see that you approach the day from that centered place of being. And so meditating is a great way of doing it. And there are all kinds of brilliant meditations that are available now for people to do and work on that kind of thing. Some people like active meditations where they're guided so that their mind is occupied with the process of of what the instructions are and all that kind of stuff. It can be really helpful. But the goal of it is to really get into that centered place where the light in you just kind of expands. The other thing is to do things that bring you joy within your world. Like if you love to be in nature, if you like to go walk on the beach, if you like to do creative things and be in that creative space where you're in the flow of what you're doing, all of these things can help us find our center. And to begin to make decisions that respect your soul. So, for example, instead of forcing you to do things or buying into ways of thinking that it has to be this way, or I'm supposed to do that, or my to do list is 47,000 things, you get to a place where you really allow yourself to make choices that are always in honor of maintaining that balance and the integrity within your own system and your own being. And so there's a whole schooling around that. It's not what we're taught. We have to learn it for ourselves. But that's kind of how I see that unfolding for people. And you see people doing it. Like it's, everywhere you turn today, people are looking to be affirmed in that kind of thinking and in that kind of understanding.
Yeah, and as you're sharing, it's like I feel like the more accustomed, the more that we embrace that process of tending to our own energy, the easier it becomes. We know when something feels a little bit off, or we feel, it's like, oh, yep, I need to go back to center. I'm going to, spend this time meditating rather than attending to my to-do list. It's like,
Exactly right. And it's what you're saying is really, really powerful, because our tendency is to be so busy in our energy, our mind, our feelings, tension we build up in our body, that we can't hear that inner voice. Like there's so much else going on. It's like you're walking in a storm and you're trying to pay attention to something at the end of the street. But if you still the storm, like if you find a place where you can still all of that inside of you, then you can see clearly what it is your soul would want you to see. And so the more we learn to live in that quiet space, that centered place of being, our intuition grows stronger, gets really, really powerful, like you're describing. If something is off, if someone is being honest with you, if they're being dishonest with you. You're guided in your choices, you're guided in everything about your life because you're still enough inside of yourself to follow the guidance that you're being shown and given.
Hmm. Yes. And life becomes more fun,
100%.
more magical. We go in places that that are, like you said, our soul is desiring to explore and experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Oh,
And so I'll often say to people when I'm teaching classes and things, anything that you already know, if that's defining your future, it'll always have to be the way you know. In order to move outside of that space, you have to be guided intuitively to things that will expand you. But to do that with precision, you want your soul to be showing you what they are.
hmm.
And so if you do that and you learn to really listen to that intuitive voice inside of you, it'll encourage you sometimes to do things you wouldn't do if you're being rational or you're being logical about it. So for example, the example I shared earlier about going to the bookstore, I had never gone to this bookstore before. I could have easily talked myself out of that intuition and said, oh, that's all just foolishness and craziness, don't bother doing that. But if I had done that, I would have like aborted the experience that I had by doing it. And that opened up something that changed my life forever. And so you can kind of see how powerful those moments are if you listen to them.
Yeah.
But I didn't know I was looking for that book. I could never have found the book through logic because I didn't know it existed. I didn't even know Kundalini existed, for example, or anything like that. But my soul knew it does, and it knew where to take me to give me what I need to nurture me at that point in my experience. And we're all the same, and our soul is always doing that with us in really unique ways. And if we listen to that intuition, it'll always take us to those kinds of experiences for sure.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful example. It is. I love that so much. I want to ask you about DNA because there's so much talk, especially recently, about DNA. And I feel like there's a lot that perhaps, people are not aware of. And just inviting anything that you feel like, whether there's things that maybe impact our DNA negatively or ways that we can actually repair DNA and begin to activate more.
Absolutely. So we've known about DNA since about 1952. So Watson and Crick had the experience of, they were actually taught about DNA through visionary experiences. And they were shown this double helix model of the structure of DNA. And they began to formulate a scientific understanding of what DNA is. And then that science grew, became aware that as humans, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes that exist in the nucleus, and they make proteins and they make all kinds of substrates that build our body, and they function, everything functions on the basis of things that the DNA are creating. And then we had a genome project that kind of mapped out all the genes that exist in the human genetic field. And they started to understand that there's this vast swath of DNA that doesn't seem to have a purpose. They were calling it junk DNA at the beginning. And so what was not being understood fully is DNA is a really complex quantum molecule. And it has a structure that we don't yet understand in any way because esoteric aspects of understanding are not part of our science at this point in time. But it's starting to change. And the way that it's changing in genetics is through understanding epigenetics. And there are scientific studies. Bruce Lipton has done a lot of work in this field that kind of demonstrates that the consciousness that a person lives in has influence on their genetic expression. So, for example, even if you had a gene to manifest an illness, you might not manifest it depending on the epigenetic structure of where your DNA is living, or in other words, your life. So if you were, under a lot of stress, a lot of negativity, a lot of contraction in the DNA, those kinds of things are more apt to happen than if you're living a joyful life, an expanded consciousness, kind of a fulfilling experience of reality. And certain things are less likely to occur if you're in that space. Now, that doesn't mean they don't occur at all. It's just they're less likely to occur. And so what happens in that process is it begins to allow us to conceptualize that consciousness and DNA have a relationship. And it's simple, but it's super profound when you really begin to understand it. The kind of work that I teach about the DNA comes from more mystical types of visions. So it's something that people are either ready for or they're not. It's not like something a person has to have a certain openness of spirit or an openness of mind, or just kind of resonate with it when they are exposed to the information and they think there's really truth in this and I know it. and so that and so the way I was shown the system is as a person who's incarnate in a body, there's a field of energy that communicates with the DNA right from the very first cell that that started our life. And so, back in the very beginning at conception, when the genes from our parents merged together to create the very first cell that became the full human being that we are today, this field was always there. And it's there overlighting the development of that human being. And it's a spiritual interface. It's a place where the consciousness of our soul merges with the physical body. And that's also part of our DNA. But that's not something that's in a microscope or in a typical kind of physical experiment in science or observation in science. We're going to be exposed to that kind of information through those kinds of revelations. People are going to be given information, and then we're going to integrate it into our understanding of DNA as a concept. And so I was given a channel by an entity named Cryon. I don't know if you know Lee Carroll, his work with Cryon. It's interesting because so much of the information that I've been given parallels exactly with things that Cryon has said. And in this particular aspect of things, Cryon has gave it a personal channel to me when he was here in Ottawa. And he said, the information that you're revealing about DNA will one day be proven by science. But for now, it's something that science can't quite understand because it's not at the level of working with quantum energies and the quantum aspect of reality. But we're on the threshold of that. And we're going to begin seeing quantum energy fields through technology and through things that are developed in science. And when we do, we're going to begin understanding better the energetic structure of all these things. And you're going to see that everything you're saying is precise and true. And so that was really reassuring for me to hear, because when you're revealing information that's based on visions and internal experiences, it's so easy to say anything you want, really. You have to have a lot of integrity to do it from a place of purity, and to be able to understand that what you're saying to another person, they have no frame of reality on which to base an acceptance or a rejection of what you're saying. They either have to feel it or feel that it's not right for them, kind of thing. And so I was always very conscientious of that in sharing information with people, because I would never want to say anything that I really don't believe in my heart and soul is purely true. I would only want to say what I really believe to be true. And so the evolution of that knowledge and the evolution of that understanding will expand as science expands into quantum worlds. But for now, most of this information doesn't come from scientific sources. It comes from mystical sources. It comes from people who've channeled information or had personal visions and these kinds of things. And so that's how I just share what I'm shown, basically, is what happens.
Yeah, I mean, and it's so true because science catches up in a lot of ways. I mean, I feel like we now know through epigenetics that things like stress and limiting beliefs and fear actually impacts our physical structure. And so, years ago that wasn't proven by science, and now so it absolutely makes perfect sense that um, there's a process, and what you're sharing is so important and needed, I think, for what we're going through transformationally as a collective of humanity at this time. So thank you so much for You're,
You're very, very welcome.
yeah, I feel like this entire conversation has been an energetic transmission. You emanate so much peace and have such beautiful wisdom to share. And I just want to honor you for all that you are and that you're bringing forward. This has been such an enlightening conversation.
Well, that's super sweet and super kind, Emily. As they say, it takes one to know one. You're radiant yourself. You really are a bright, bright light, and it's amazing what you're doing and bringing to the planet. So keep up the good work.
Thank you so, so much. Yeah, I want to share with listeners
Mhm.
where they can go. I know that you have a practitioner training where you actually certify people in this process of being able to, work with the unity healing energetic process. And so I'd love to hear more about that, where people can learn more and
Sure.
the books and all of that.
Yeah, sure thing. So most of the information, I have two websites, and the second website is more pertinent for this particular information. It's called unityfieldhealing.com altogether. And on the web page, you can read about Unity Field Healing. You can read about some of the other work that takes place in the healing, but I'll just kind of introduce it briefly so people understand. The Unity Field Healing work is an energy work, kind of like Reiki or other kinds of energy healing modalities, but it's based on information that I was shown in these experiences that I had that taught me about how to work with the quantum field of energy to help people move through the ascension journey. And it can be used in a healing context, like to move through problems or challenges or illnesses and these kinds of things. But it can also be used from a perspective of personal evolution or ascension transformation. So, as we go through the process, all kinds of people are not experiencing illnesses or things, but maybe experiencing blockages or restrictions or things that are getting in the way of their development. And they want support or help around that. And so the work is broken up into 3 sessions. And the first session is an attunement process within the DNA axis. The second is an attunement to a very specific light template that I was shown that's a universal recalibrating pattern within the quantum DNA system. So big words, but it's kind of like a light field or a sacred geometry that works within the structure of the DNA. And the third session is people. So if you're experiencing something personally, as a challenge, or you want to overcome something that you recognize is holding you back, or you want to develop a new skill or talent or ability, you can bring an intention into the energy process, and then the session unfolds around the intention. So in other words, the energy is responding to the intention that's brought to the work. And so the work evolved originally as sessions that I was doing for people. And then I was shown how to teach it and initiate people to be practitioners to do the work as well. And so the practitioner training is for people who are drawn to kind of the new quantum level of energy healing. And it's a practice that you would use to help other people, like you have a healing practice and want to support other human beings in going through things as well. And so it's a weekend training, and you are initiated to do the session 1, 2, and 3 all in the same weekend of practice. And the energy work is kind of neat because when I had done things energetically before this point, so much of it was technical, like you do this to the arm, or you touch the chakra and you spin clockwise, and all the different things that people talk about doing in healing. But this work is really one of making space for expansion of the soul. It's all about letting light come into the body and expand through the biofield to help people achieve that integration and the
Mm.
energy changes that come with being able to do that. And so the sessions are offered. The training is online now. It was done in person at first, but through COVID, we adapted it all to teach online. And so they're,
Do you do in
the,
person and online now as well?
sorry,
Do you also have in person as well now? Or is it all?
we will again. So we have an in-person training in Rochester, New York in the spring of next year. And that'll be the first in-person one that we do after the shutdown. But
Amazing. And where can people go to learn more about the training?
yeah. So all this is, if you go to the website, unityfieldhealing.com, there's tabs at the top. There's this section specifically on unity field healing. And then I'll just touch briefly on it because if people go to the website, they're going to encounter some other things, and it might be helpful to have a 2-minute orientation
Yeah.
so people understand. So, as I was doing this work, I got to a point in 2019 where, in a meditation, I had a group of light beings that came to me in the meditation. And they said that they are the Syrian blue white collective, and they were light beings. The way that I was seeing them was these luminous fields of light. They weren't really physical. And they told me that they have been working in the process of unity field healing since I was being triggered to remember some of this work, and that they're there in the training doing for others and this kind of stuff. And they also asked that I begin to do transmissions on a monthly basis so that we could do meditations together to support people in the ascension process. And so every month I do a transmission, and they're themed around certain topics of teaching that are part of the first 2 hour aspect of the event. And then the last hour is a meditation we do together where we go into a quantum space of meditation. The Syrian beings come to be part of that meditation, and they work with people in a really individual way, really tailored and personal way to support them in their where they are at that moment in time in their journey. And so there's a section on the webpage that talks all about the Syrian Blue White Collective, and there's a page that links you to these meditations, and they're all free on YouTube, so people can enjoy those and do them as well. Or they can register and participate in the live transmission events that happen online every month as well. And everything happening is on the events tab, so people can always stay up to date or register for things through those links.
Amazing. We will link to all of that in the show notes. So many beautiful offerings and ways of connecting with you and your work. I would love to hear if there's any last words of wisdom that you'd like to share with listeners.
Yeah, I think I love this question because the answer to it changes depending on where we are energetically in the process at a point in time. This is a particularly challenging time. And so the energy is changing quickly. There's a lot of resistance to the change, and there's friction between that, and that manifests on the planet in different ways. So all we have to do is turn on the news and we can kind of see what I mean by saying that. So there's conflicts, there's wars, there's deceit, there's misinformation, there's control, there's all kinds of things that are kind of happening. And people have to learn how to find their balance in the middle of that and not get sucked up into the negativity of all of that process and where it brings us as individuals. And so this is really a time for people to be still, to observe, to really be in a centered space, kind of see yourself as the eye of the storm. The world is swirling around you, and you're just really learning how to be in a centered place and walk through all those changes with the grace that your soul will give you to do that if you make time and space for it. So there's probably nothing more important that people can do than what we talked about earlier and what you introduced by your question. How do you find that center? How do you do that for yourself? And so understand that, and that it's a transitional time. It will pass. This forever. It's going to begin to truly change. And as we move into the energy of 2023, we're going to see lots of experiential changes. Things are going to happen that are going to catalyze transformations. And so we have to be really open-hearted to the experiences, no matter what they look like or how big or little they seem. Just to understand in your heart, it's part of an evolution. And it's always trying to bring us to something better and higher in consciousness. And we approach everything that way, we'll tend to see what we're really trying to get from the experience or what the potential of the experience really is. And so I encourage everybody to kind of live their life that way from that place, and to stay in your heart and to remember it's really moving to a place of luminous being. We're going to achieve peace. We're going to achieve a new foundation. And from that, all kinds of beautiful things are going to blossom. So to stay the ride, not to give up or get caught up in the challenges of the moment, but really keep remembering that and remind yourself every day if you need to.
Mm. Yes, I so deeply resonate with that message. Thank you so much for sharing your light, your wisdom, your heart, your energy with us today. Dr. Ryan, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you to everyone listening. If you resonated with this conversation and you feel like somebody would benefit, please share it with a friend. And as always, I'm sending you so much love and gratitude. Look forward to connecting with you next time.